Hello, everybody, and welcome to Module 1 of our capital raising training series. We have over 50, probably close to 100 people on the call right now, and as we go through this capital training module, I'd like people to ask questions as you go. Because there's so many people on the line, we've muted everybody, but you can enter your questions into the chat box here within the chat software. And if you'd like to, you don't have to wait till the end to ask your questions. I think that this is going to be a better presentation if it's interactive. And I also think that, sometimes when we're in our own industries for so long, we can either say terms other people are not aware of what they mean, or gloss over things very quickly that might be very important to you and getting your capital raising to the next level. So feel free to stop me if you want me to dig in further into something I'm mentioning. This training is being recorded in audio MP3 and video MP4 formats. We're pretty quick now at turning it around, and typically within 24 hours, you'll be sent both formats automatically, so you don't need to request that. And would love any feedback you guys have on this afterwards. There's going to be several more capital raising training modules, a lot of things that we cover within our full-day capital raising training workshop in much more detail. But we do the best we can here over webinar and try to deliver, $1,000, $3,000 worth of value within this 60 to 90 minute presentation. And pretty much the format here is going to be me presenting ideas for about 60 to 70 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions near the end if you weren't able to ask them during the presentation. So it kind of goes without saying, but some of you are listening from London, some from Singapore, Australia, the United States, Canada. I think we had one person from Brazil possibly this time. So what you can do in your jurisdiction with your type of fund or your type of investment firm could be completely different than somebody else here on the line. So make sure you check with your compliance counsel or attorney before taking action on any of the strategies that we mention or anybody else mentions in the industry. So a quick preview of some of the ideas we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about David Ogilvy. We're going to talk about grizzly bears catching salmon. We're going to talk about the European Business Summit and being asked to speak at big events. We're also going to talk about my daughter is about 1.5 years old, and you can see here, if you're looking at the PowerPoint on your computer, her sitting in a little sandbox here with her friends. So first off, the first part of this is going to go over how to have a focused and systematic capital raising process. And this is really critical to pretty much everything else in capital raising. If you don't get this first, then most of your efforts will be wasted. So first off, a lot of my work is done with family offices. Early on, I was raising capital, not having a lot of progress. Then we started switching channels and started focusing on wealth management firms. I then kind of stumbled across family offices. This was about 2006, and realized that family offices were probably the best niche within wealth management firms to focus on. But it was nearly impossible to learn anything about family offices. Nobody was writing about them back then. It was a random Bloomberg article, a random article by the Financial Times. So I started a website dedicated to sharing everything I could learn about family offices, and I would read 10 different articles on starting a family office, and then write my own article on it, and cite some sources along the way, and eventually developed a lot of knowledge and expertise and experience working with family offices. But I have a picture here of Portland, Oregon, and that's because I went to Oregon State University and University of Portland for my MBA. And I came from Portland, Oregon. I wasn't born in Manhattan, going to $100,000 a year preschool and going to Harvard for my undergrad and Wharton for my MBA. So I'd just like to encourage everyone listening to this that if you feel like maybe you're competing against a lot of people that are very high pedigree, Oxford, Stanford, Wharton type people, don't worry about that at all. The strategies I share with you is going to allow you to be more effective than they are. And if I can do this, pretty much anybody can do this. And to fast forward, this is what we've developed to date by targeting this niche. We have the #1 family office association in the world with 72,000 members. We've written over 1,800 articles on the niche. We have a couple hundred videos, over 50 hours of audio interviews, millions of views on our articles. We've met face-to-face with over 1,000 family offices in 15 different countries. I was just in Toronto and meeting with a couple of family offices about 3 days ago, and I may be in Prague and Paris over the next 2 weeks, again meeting with family offices and speaking at an event. And we were just in Singapore about 3 weeks ago doing a family office workshop, so a very global brand. We've got the best-selling book in the industry, the Family Office Book. We have a qualified family office professional training program, and we have a division that focuses on billionaire family offices and another division that focuses on single-family offices. Now, the reason I tell you that is not to just brag. It is to show you that it came from Portland, Oregon, and going to Oregon State University to having a very niche-targeted investor group that now comes to me instead of me having to cold call them. Because when I first got into capital raising, I was cold calling people all day long. Nobody replied to voicemails. No one replied to my emails. I wasn't adding value to anybody, and it was not very effective at all. So the strategies I'm going to share with you today is how to get past that, how to target an investor type, and on other webinars we'll talk about avatars and different types of investors, and we'll talk about some habits and rituals and CRM systems and marketing automation and other things like that. But on this webinar, we're really going to dig into this topic of how do you position yourself so you're like a grizzly bear at the top of a waterfall and the salmon are jumping into your mouth instead of you having to cold call, which is basically like sitting on the side of a lake and shooting a harpoon into the water when you think you might see a fish, but because of the water reflection and how fast the fish are, most likely you're not going to harpoon very many fish being on the edge of the water. So that's the equivalent to what I think a lot of capital raisers are doing, especially when they first get started. And I think that anybody, whether you've been in capital raising for 1 year or 10 years, is going to find this advice either as a really good reminder or something that's really going to change how you raise capital. So what I want to cover here today is a process that has brought our firm over $5 million in business in terms of revenue, products, and services sold, and we've used these strategies to raise well over $200 million in terms of capital raised. In the 3 parts I'm going to go through, first part is going to be defining your sandbox and making sure it's a very tight sandbox. The second thing is going to be over-investing in specialization. And the third thing is going to be making sure you're established as the #1 expert in your niche. And I've got many examples of that we can go through. So first off, a lot of people try to raise capital from high net worth individuals, friends and family, people in their community, maybe surgeons and business owners, maybe retired professionals, maybe groups part of certain types of associations. Others raise capital strictly from institutions, and others raise capital from family offices and wealth management firms. But no matter what your target, most capital raisers have an approach that's so broad that they're going after all different types of investors all over the world. And I say all different types, even if it's within one niche type. So you could say, oh, we only go after institutional investors. Well, institutional investors. You could say we only go after foundations and endowments, but there's several types and sizes and institutional grades and sophistication of even endowments and foundations. So it's important to not be like these people on the beach in Rio where there's 2 million people on the beach, not be like them. So if you don't have a very targeted investor strategy, you are one of 2 million people, literally, that are reaching out to these investors. And what do you think the chances are that this guy in the blue coat, walking down here on the beach is going to stand out as the smartest guy on this beach? Or what are the chances that one person in this crowd is going to be able to stand out and look like the smartest, most resourceful, genuinely knowledgeable, and the best person to know from the investor's point of view? Because when they look out their window, there's all these people with their hand out asking for money. And you have to really stand apart. And if you're not a $10 billion plus blue chip brand, then you really have to use the strategies we're going to present here today, or you're going to be like one of these people on the beach. So this should be, scaring you into being motivated to, use some new strategies if you don't have these types of strategies in place already. So this is what you want to have happen. The little girl here in the yellow shirt is actually my daughter. She's just about 18 months old. And she basically is playing there with her friends in a tiny little sandbox. It's about 2-3 feet wide at the very most. And you can see, compared to the previous picture, that there's 2 million people here, and here there's 3. And this is exactly what you want to do. You want to go from targeting quote-unquote institutional investors or quote-unquote high net worth and wealth management investors to having a very targeted sandbox like this. Because in the previous example, you have 2 million competitors. Here, you might have 2. And this is something that is realistic. And what you want to do is define your targeted investor type and define who you're going after to raise capital from so tightly that you only have 1 or 2 or 3 other competitors, and in some cases, in the beginning, you'll define it so tightly you'll have 0 competitors that are doing exactly what you're doing, but then somebody will probably copy you and probably come into your little sandbox, and that's fine. That's going to happen in any niche that you operate in, and it's just the reality of business, really. So I wanted to give a couple examples of this. The easiest one to provide is within my own business. When we got started, there was nobody providing family office education. We were literally the only website that publicly posted family office articles, videos, white papers. We didn't charge $20,000 a year for membership or $5,000 a year for access to a couple of our events or anything like that. It was just open access and very transparent, sharing consultative quality family office advice. So at that point, I was in the sandbox of 1. And people started emulating. There's a couple news websites now. There's a couple old associations that are being a little bit more open and public and sharing white papers. There's a new association that competes against us directly that started up, and a couple global groups as well. So that sandbox got more crowded, and we left that as part of our business. We didn't close down that website, but we further defined our focus on single-family offices by acquiring singlefamilyoffices.com, starting to do work more with single-family offices, and then ultimately to focusing on billion-dollar-plus family offices. So right now in the marketplace, we don't see anybody else who exclusively and explicitly is saying we only work with billion-dollar-plus families and single-family offices. And so that's been our latest iteration. And so we're literally in a sandbox of 1, again, by focusing on these billion-dollar-plus family offices and their needs. And if you can do that in your marketplace, then you can be very powerful. I think that another approach would be, I was speaking to a private bank. They manage $10 to $20 billion already. They would like to start a multifamily office, and they were talking about the same thing. There's so many multifamily offices now out there. There's just an ocean of them. How do you stand apart? How do we carve out a piece of the market for ourselves? And one thing I suggested is perhaps they position themselves as we are the only family office for professional athletes. So we are the only family office where everything is created for commodity and, oil, natural gas, commodity type families, and we understand the risk of those assets, hedging against them, trying to retire based on streams of income that comes from those assets. And you could really stand apart and be in a sandbox of 1. Even though there's 10,000 family offices out there, you'd be the only one that focuses on commodity families. So you can see it's not that hard once you dig into it. You just need to figure out, like Jim Collins says in his book, Good to Great, what your 3 circles are. What can make you a lot of money, what could draw upon your natural strength and your DNA to be best in the world at, and what are you passionate about, you'd actually enjoy doing, and you're not going to get tired of in a year or 2 because it's going to take a lot of work to establish yourself. And if you can find something that makes a lot of money, leverages your natural DNA, and is something you're passionate about, that should be your sandbox. Like, it has to intersect all 3 circles, and you only have 1 to 3 competitors, and then that is where you should target your investor types. Some people I've met strictly raise capital from foundations. They've had a lot of success from that. Others, like one I met, they have an association of medical professionals, and then they raise capital exclusively from that association of medical professionals. So there's lots of different ways to implement this, and feel free to ask questions if you find this confusing or need help applying it to your situation. We have one question here. To establish ourselves as an expert, what approach should one start with as a first task to focus on, and then stabilize that and go to the second one, and so on? That's an excellent question. we're going to go through some hints at that in the next couple slides, but there's a whole capital raising funnel that we'll go through on another webinar that digs into the day-to-day, step-by-step, literal instructions on how to implement all this. But the short answer is that once you identify your sandbox and you have a laser focus on a very specific type of family, let's say you only want to raise capital from foundations in New York or in New York, Connecticut, Boston, for example, then what you want to do is think, what are those people looking for? What are the foundation CIOs looking for? Another way to look at this, if you're only going to raise capital from professional hockey players that live in Canada, then you have to think, how do I get access to the professional hockey players in Canada? Do they have national conferences? Do I work through the coaches? Are there financial advisors available through the National Hockey League industry? Is there a way to do a joint venture with the National Hockey League and give them equity in your firm that's going to be kind of a parasitic relationship with their league, and just recognize that up front and make it a win-win for them? You have to think that way of how you're going to get access to this niche audience, and then what will they find valuable, and then you produce a lot of content on those topics that they find most frustrating and they need help with, or that they most want to kind of achieve within their own personal career. And we'll give examples of that in just a minute to make it more clear. Okay, so the second step is to overinvest in specialization. So one of my favorite heroes is somebody who's pretty famous, David Ogilvy. He is the #1 expert in copywriting and advertising to have ever lived. He's written some of the most famous advertisements and copy for Rolls-Royce and hundreds of other companies. He started his own PR firm on Madison Avenue in New York when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and became what Time Magazine called one of the top 100 most influential people of the last century. And so I think he's somebody definitely to study and to know. And the reason I mention him here is that he basically had a great disdain and disrespect for anybody that didn't read every single book ever written on copywriting and advertising. And he said, if you work in advertising, why wouldn't you take the time to read every single book? And you don't have the right to call yourself an expert or a leader or a CEO in this industry if you don't do your homework. And so back then, there were less books on copywriting and advertising, probably similar to how many books there are right now on capital raising and family offices, or on pension funds and endowment investing. There's really a pretty slim library in that area. But he bought the 20 or 50 books that were available at that time, and he read every single one. And then he built on that a layer of confidence along with his other skills and abilities and accomplishments, and was able to kind of tout that as, I am the expert and I've done the hard work and I deserve to be the person that you follow and that you hire to do your advertising. And so he just overinvested so deeply in his knowledge in terms of his approach that, if there is any way to improve his knowledge or improve his abilities, he has already done it and the competition has not. And if you look around in your own industry and let's say, for example, you run a bond fund, or let's say a commodity fund or a fixed income fund, most people who work in fixed income have not read every book ever written on fixed income. I would say that maybe there's only 1 or 2 people or maybe 4 people in the whole world who have done that. But it's very inexpensive to do that. All it costs is time. A student in college could do it if they so set out to. And obviously you can't run a fund just based on book knowledge. That's not his point. He didn't run his advertising agency just on these books. That was just one of 20 things he did to become very, very specialized. And it's that mindset which is most important, the mindset that you're going to do whatever it takes and go above and beyond to become very, very specialized. We take the same approach in the family office industry. I own and in the process of, I've got about 16 of the 30 books read that have been written on family offices, so that I can one day say the same thing as David Ogilvy, that I've read every single book ever written on the industry. And we find it working for us. When I first started my business, it was basically a informational website that we were giving away information to people on capital raising, family offices, etc. And what I found was that not by reading every book on capital raising and hedge funds and private equity, etc., but by reading a lot and then every day writing an article, and it's just a 2-paragraph article, 300 words, 400 words, and then just hitting publish, many times just not even reading it twice, just pumping the content out and getting that done every day. I was able to establish myself in 6 months after starting to do that on a daily basis. I got invited to speak at the European Business Summit. And now at this point, I'd never ran an investment fund. I had no public speaking experience. I'd never spoken anywhere outside of an academic classroom in my whole life. I had never written a book. I didn't have any training programs. I didn't have $1 million plus a year business. I had no large associations behind me. Really not that much credibility compared to what we've been able to accomplish as of today. But I got invited to speak at this conference where the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, and I believe it was Turkey as well, were on stage at the same event. And out of everybody in the hedge fund industry, they paid for me to fly to Brussels, put me up in a hotel, and speak on the state of the hedge fund industry, all because I had specialized myself and written about 500 different little blog posts, is basically what they were, on hedge funds and capital raising. And that amazed me. And from that point on, I doubled down and decided that the investor segment I was going to target and way overinvest in is going to be family offices, and then that evolved to single-family offices and billion-dollar family offices, as I explained earlier. But this works, and David Ogilvy proves it. He became one of the most influential people of his time, and he was just a genius in several ways, but over-specialization in his craft was one thing. And then I found and kind of stumbled across this strategy of becoming quote-unquote over-specialized in terms of providing a lot of value to a niche and learning everything you can about that little targeted niche that you're going after. So now I want to talk about how to become, the authority of your niche. And this is the most important part of the presentation, and it goes directly to the question from Mr. Kahn earlier on this capital raising training module. And the point here is that if you are in a sandbox with 5 people or 7 people, someone's going to wonder, who's the best? Maybe if you're in Miami, there's one in Miami, so that's an easy decision. Go have coffee with him. Go meet with him. But given there's not somebody who you already have a connection to, or it's not just based in your city and nobody else is, you have to decide who is the authority. Who is the person I trust the most? Who do we go to first? If we don't like him, we'll go number 2 or 3. But the person whose position is number 1 will get the lion's share of the business. They might get 60 or 80% of the business. Well, number 2 survives and does pretty good, and number 3 just gets the scraps. And number 4 is pretending like they have a business, but they're really wondering whether they should shut down, and they're looking for greener pastures. That's been my experience in just about every industry. And I think that's very true in capital raising. In a mandate, most cases, if somebody is looking to allocate to a very specific type of fund manager, like a diversified real estate fund and private equity, or an MLP fund or a commodity fund focused on Southeast Asia, for example, they're typically going to allocate to one fund manager. So number 2 gets 0. Number 2 doesn't even get anything to survive on. They get $0 from that investor. So if you can routinely come up as number 1, then obviously you'll be in much better shape. So the trick is to figure out, for that targeted investor type, for that little sandbox that you've drawn for yourself, what do those people value, and what are the credible, tangible points that prove you're number 1 in that niche, that aren't just a lot of passion, it's not just your attitude, it's not just your long-term perspective, it's not just that you went to a great school, it's something that's based on hard fact, social proof, third-party endorsement, things that you can really, put a flag in the ground, and it's not just a bunch of puffery and fluff. All of it has a positioning marketing angle, but it's not all just a bunch of fluff. And one of my favorite examples of this is somebody who's based right here in Portland, Oregon, and that's one of the founders here of Fairway America. And their group focuses on a small niche of the real estate industry, on mortgage pools and mortgage pool funds. They help run an association in that niche, and truly they are number 1 or number 2 in that niche because they really don't have anybody else who's doing what they do. If there is, it's an attorney, and that's one of 5 things he does. They're doing this full on as a business, and as that niche is growing globally, their business is growing globally. And that's one of the trade-offs for anybody that chooses a very well-defined target, is that, yeah, if you go after professional hockey players in Canada, obviously there's going to be less of them than if you go after any type of ultra-wealthy individual in Canada. But how do you target, quote-unquote, any type of ultra-wealthy individual? How do you appear different? How do you know what their needs are? How do you know what their investment priorities likely will be? How do you know how they want to be spoken to? How do you know what type of office they're going to be most comfortable in, or how you should be dressing day to day? There's a ton of advantages by focusing, and Fairway America is one excellent example of doing that. Another person who's much more mainstream, and tens of millions of people know him, is Tony Robbins, in the self-improvement niche. At least for about a decade, he was by far the number one standout brand, being on TV, writing a dozen best-selling books, doing seminars and workshops all over the world. Whether you like his, fire and coal walking challenges approach and his pep talk approach or not, doesn't matter. What you need to do is look at him and understand that he became the authority of his niche. And when he did it, self-improvement was a relatively new niche. It wasn't like it is now, a very broad niche. Another person on a massive scale that I didn't put on here because so many people just don't like him is Donald Trump. But again, put aside the fact that you probably don't like him or like what he says or his politics. But if you put that aside, think about what most people would say if you interviewed them on the streets of Manhattan or Singapore or in Canada. Who are the number one, number two, and number three real estate experts or real estate investment experts globally? And if they don't work in finance and they don't work in real estate, they're typically going to say number one is Donald Trump, number two is Donald Trump, and number three is Donald Trump, and they don't know who the other big experts are. They just don't know. And so Donald Trump has done such a good job of branding himself. Whether or not his process to getting there was wise or not, who knows? Definitely spent some credibility coin to do so, but he's gotten to the point where his name is just everywhere. Other examples here, a little bit more down to earth, is an attorney in Chicago, who's pictured here bottom left, Mr. Handler. He's someone who is, I've looked up to for quite some time. Besides myself, he's one of just two people I know in the United States that work with over 30 different billionaire families and have those relationships in place. And he's done so by moving to Chicago. He found the most expensive neighborhood basically to be in, and he got a moderate-sized house there that he could afford and get into, and long-term his neighbors became his clients, and he has a lot of CFO, CEO, CIO, ultra-wealthy clients, and now they're national and global, but it started out with a real focus on Chicago, and he was able to carve out a sandbox for himself because other people weren't aiming as high as he was. He was always aiming high for those $100 million families, for those billion-dollar families. And his approach, and he told me this over a glass of wine about a year and a half ago, was that you aim high, you stay high for the types of clients you target. And that's why it's so important to choose your sandbox, because if you don't and you go after just wealth management or high net worth, you might bump into a lot of people that are worth $200,000 or $500,000, and by nature bump into those because those are your friends, those are the people you went to college with, etc. And you'll get really good at targeting them and really good at talking to them and selling them. But then if you try to move up scale and move up the totem pole, you'll get crushed and ignored and maybe fall on your face trying to do so. So I think it's really important to use Handler's advice to aim high, stay high. A couple other real quick examples. Big hero of mine is Jeffrey Gilmer. He started out in the 1990s making, I think he said, around $50,000, $75,000 a year as a salesperson. He was doing some sales training programs for people because he had been in sales for 20 years. And what he did is he started writing an article for the local Charlotte, North Carolina newspaper. Well, after writing it for about 2 months, he got somebody who called him and hired him, and he wanted to hire him to give a speech. About 2 weeks later, he got called again, and somebody wanted to maybe have him do consulting together with him. Then he got called again a couple months later for an in-house training on sales. So he started syndicating his article into different newspapers, and he got in 5 newspapers in the first year and 15 or 20 the next year. And now 10 years later, his weekly sales article is syndicated in 148 different newspapers. His weekly sales e-zine called Sales Caffeine goes out to 1.5 million people every week. He's written over 12 best-selling books, and he has a multi-million-dollar-a-year business, and he is a top 5 figurehead in the whole sales industry, and sales is a very big sandbox. So imagine if you applied Jeffrey Gitomer's discipline and strategy of giving away excellent consultative quality advice just once a week to a niche audience. In this case, it was on sales, so not very niche, honestly, but imagine if you did it to a more niche audience, what authority you could build over time. And he said in one of his books, and this was my inspiration for writing my first book back when I was completing my MBA. It was called Rainmaker, and I've written 8 books now. And my inspiration was this quote by Gitomer, who said, I'll just freely give away to you, and I've written 12 books now, I'll freely give away to you my number one piece of advice that's worth over $1 million. All my competition can read this piece of advice, they could copy me, they could emulate my whole business, but I'm just going to give it away because I know that nobody is going to follow this advice. But the advice is to sit down and share at least one solid piece, article, something written or audio created every week that is consulting quality advice to a niche audience, and you'll very quickly dominate your industry, and you'll reverse the flow of you making cold calls to people to being like that grizzly bear at the top of the waterfall, and the clients just come to you like clockwork. So Jeffrey Gitomer went from making $50,000 to $75,000 a year to well over $1 million a year, and he never had cold call anyone. He had somebody hired just to answer phone calls and emails, and that was a massive inspiration to me. And at the time I read that, I was just a passionate, energetic, younger person, and basically just said, this is about 10 years ago or 12 years ago now, and I just said, I'm going to be that person who takes his advice, and I'm going to give away that consultative quality advice. So everything you see in my business is there because of Jeffrey Gitomer. That's why I wrote my first book and all the books after that. That's why we've written over 2,000 articles and produced over 1,000 videos as a company and over 300 hours of audio interviews, is because of that statement that he made. So I think that that is something that is a really inspiring story to me, and hopefully will be to you too, because you can see that in the investment world, it's a much smaller niche than sales. It might be more sophisticated, but that's another advantage that you can use. And if you target pension fund CIOs, if you target foundations, if you target National Hockey League players, if you target plastic surgeons or family offices only in Switzerland, you can come up with a strategy where no one else is competing with you, and you're just adding so much more value from your thought leadership that you blow everybody else away. A couple other real quick examples. Dan Kennedy, he's written over 10 books focusing on CEOs. He's just prolific. He has constant newsletters coming out, constant workshops and seminars. He has over 50 different information products in the marketplace, and most CEOs have heard of Dan Kennedy, read one of his books, gotten training from him. He's featured in many magazines. And same here with Eben Pagan. He's really done well in a few different niches using all these strategies. And with all these people you see here, it's a combination of defining your sandbox, becoming very specialized in it, and then making sure you become the authority by being helpful to the industry and providing thought leadership and getting out in front of them. Because you can go to cold calling training all day long, and if you can get somebody to answer live, you might get skilled enough to get a lot of them to agree to meet with you. But most people just don't answer their phones nowadays. Most people won't answer the email unless they know you. So what you want to have happen is have them find you, see you as the expert, and then they'll welcome you to their office as a welcome guest. As my mentor Joe Polish says, you'll be a welcome guest instead of an unwelcome pest. And that's the goal with capital raising, is not to be the pest. You want to be the welcome guest in every situation. We have another question here from Mark this time. It says, my understanding from you and others is that family offices are staying away from investing funds and investing in single-off deals. Is this current? Definitely there's a pendulum swing where in the past I think it was more like maybe 20% of family offices were actively investing in operating businesses and direct investments, and maybe 30% wanted to. Nowadays I think it's only 25% are currently direct investing in operating businesses, but maybe 60% want to. So in other words, most of the capital is still where it used to be, because these family offices aren't connected to deal flow. They don't know which investment bankers to work with. A lot of the deals don't look so great once you dig into them. They don't know how to manage the risk. They don't have anyone who's providing them with direct investment advisory, oversight, and services. And that leads to a lot of challenges, and it might take them 3 to 5 years to make their first acquisition. So the trend is swinging towards direct investments, but all that means is that traditionally as an industry, possibly 15 to 17% of a family office's portfolio on average, might be allocated to hedge funds and private equity, and maybe another 15 to 30%, depending on the family, would be allocated to real estate. So all this means is that some money that was in public markets and long-only funds and ETFs, mutual funds, bonds, and some money that was in real estate alternative investments will be siphoned off to be put into direct investments. But it's not instead of. I don't see many funds, many family offices saying, we're going to completely get out of hedge funds and private equity and only do direct investing. I don't think that's the case. There's many areas such as commodities, such as lower middle markets, such as Asian, African business opportunities, that there's a ton of value to be had by working with a private equity fund. And you can't be skilled at every niche. You might have made your money in technology, but then how are you going to, make money by investing in, food and beverage businesses, et cetera, or commodities? So I think that's something important to think about is, don't get too dissuaded or excited about recent trends that you read about, because these are important changes, but it doesn't mean that game is over for someone who's raising capital for real estate. Another question here about how should one pick the sandbox to focus on? We are a micro VC fund which invests in seed stage software tech companies in India. Any suggestions? So I think that to choose your sandbox, think of the three circles again. What's your natural DNA, your passion, where you can make a lot of money? Think about how you could define a market that already puts you with very little competition, but actually, will be able to attract investors. I don't want to go into a lot of personal, consultative advice here, but the fact that you're a VC fund in India that is a micro VC fund and invests in seed stage software tech firms, that's a pretty narrow niche of firms. So instead of defining a sandbox based on your investment strategy, I would think of a sandbox in terms of the investors you go after. Do you want to go after Silicon Valley multimillionaires who are of Indian descent, but they became multimillionaires because of LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter going public? That could be one strategy. Just target every single person who is of Indian descent who was on a company that went public and they were a top, a first 100 or first 300 employee who probably got a lot of stock options. There's one sandbox you can go after. Identify those people, send them a newsletter every month, email them, call them, meet with them in person. Maybe they can relate to trends in India better than the general investment professional. Otherwise, you could focus on some domestic investors, go after surgeons and physicians in India, go after professional cricket players or someone else that's high net worth in India. So there's some real quick kind of off-the-cuff ideas that may or may not make sense for your strategy based on your knowledge of how your VC fund is sold. I hope that helps get some ideas going. Here's a question from Vernon. Is it better to post on your own website and drive people to your website, or better to post on other venues? All of the above. If you look at our marketing and you search for the keyword family office book, you'll see that we come up for 8 of the 10 Google search results. That's not on accident, and only half of those results are our own website. If you want to rank for, let's say, fixed income, or Asian fixed income fund, or Australian fixed income fund, and that is what you think your investors are searching for all day long on Google. When they're looking for solutions, they're always thinking, oh, we need an Australian fixed income fund. Okay, well, that may or may not be the case, but take that and apply it to your situation. What you want to do is basically think about everything that would be important to that investor or that CIO who's searching, provide helpful white papers, articles, videos, audio interviews, books, and do it all in a way that's very synergetic and just spaced out over time. It could be 20 minutes once a week that you do this. It could be 20 minutes every morning you do this if you want to be more aggressive. It could just be done over audio while you're commuting to work or back. It doesn't have to be pain and suffering to get this done. But what you want to think about is how do you come up all over the place in your industry. When I spoke in Toronto a few days ago, it was a high net worth family office conference, and I was very fortunate and humbled by the fact that the lady who was the chairman for the conference basically introduced me by saying that I didn't need an introduction because everybody there already knew me. And then after I spoke, I was giving my business card to somebody, and they said, oh, I don't need your business card. You're everywhere. It's easy to find you if I need to find you. That's what you want to do within your tiny little niche. So if somebody searches for Australian investment fund, what you want to do is have a website that has articles around that topic. You want to have a white paper called Australian, Fixed Income Fund Best Practices. You want to write a book called Australian Fixed Income Fund Insights. You want to do audio interviews with experts in your niche or have somebody interview you and post it. You want to write white papers and articles. In other words, you want to provide so much advice and value on your niche that you just create this massive Chinese wall that doesn't allow other people to come into your sandbox for free. It shouldn't be free entry into the game. And so that's what I've done with family offices, is by publishing a couple thousand articles, lots of videos, doing live events, writing the books, doing the e-reports, doing the white papers, and doing all that as you're building the wall brick by brick, higher and higher and higher, to defend your sandbox against other intruders, and just make it very painful, and it'll take them 5 or 7 years to get on the radar of people in most cases if you do this right. So the trick is to get a niche that's tight enough, but still you can survive off of it. If you target professional athletes in Portland, Oregon, you'll starve. So you got to make a sandbox that's realistic but very tight. One more question and then we'll move on, so I don't want to get too deep into questions if some people have to go at the 1 hour mark. This question is from Tarun. What must I implement or do differently in order to improve capital raising strategies in emerging countries where financial literacy is generally low? Well, I'll tell you what, I think anywhere in the world, capital raising is educational marketing. It requires educating the prospect every single time. So there's a few tricks. One, focus more on asking questions rather than pitching. Then everything you say afterwards will be more powerful. 2, always try to identify the prospects who are already educated. For example, when the micro VC fund from India guy just asked me, what sandbox should I focus on in raising capital, I immediately thought, find the tech software programmers in Silicon Valley who are worth 10, 20, 50, $100 million now because they helped build Facebook before it went public. Find them. They're going to understand software, tech. They're going to understand India. Those people are 85% up the learning curve, where you find somebody who is a oil billionaire living in Houston, Texas. He might not know anything about tech or India, and that's quite likely. So I think that global literacy, if you can call it that, or awareness, is something that's a big challenge in raising capital globally. But also financial literacy can be a problem as well. I would say, though, that if you can be the person who brings somebody from where they are to where you are and be that person that takes the time to hold their hand and walk them down that path, they're going to trust you. And they're more likely to do what you say, and you'll be more influenceable, or they'll be more influential when speaking to them. So if they're at square one and you're at square 10, you might have to have a lot of educational content for those who are already educated, which is squares like 7, 8, 9, 10. And you just lead them up. They're already tech professionals. They're already of Indian descent. You just need to move them up a few squares. But if that's not the case in your area, you might need to start at square 1 or 2 and move them up on the basics of risk management and investing. And even though you only provide part of the solution, you might need to bring them up that learning curve to show them where you fit into that solution. And what I bet is that once you do that and have those relationships, you'll create a business within your business. And you'll either start your own wealth management or family office firm. You'll start raising capital for other funds who want access to your investor relationships, et cetera. So it's a good thing if you can conquer that, because everybody in your area is struggling with it. All right, let's move on here. So why is it that there are opportunities for lots of sandboxes and lots of people becoming the expert? What I found is that it's almost overwhelming how many different sandboxes are available for the taking right now. I'm an idea person. I'm a capital raising, marketing mindset type person. So, I get very motivated and inspired by some of the opportunities. But here's an example. At the grocery store, in 1875, if you went to go buy cereal, you could basically buy oatmeal, cream of wheat, or some sort of wheat flake, from Mr. Kellogg. Actually, I think it was in the 1900s that the Kellogg brothers got started. But anyways, you can see here, there happens to be Kellogg brands here. All of these are Kellogg brands that you're seeing. And just with frosted mini wheats here, there's big frosted mini wheats, there's small ones, there's cinnamon, there's strawberry, there's blueberry, there's honey, there's probably gluten-free nowadays. And so what you can see is that in a mature marketplace, it goes from having 1 or 2 or 3 options to having 100 options. Even when you look at oatmeal now, there's literally 100 types of oatmeal. Even when you look at milk, there's hemp milk, there's hazelnut milk, there's almond milk, there's coconut milk, there's soy milk, there is milk with vitamins. There's all different types of milk you can get, when it used to be there's only one type of milk. And so many times you can charge a premium. If you're specialized, you can carve out part of the market. And lots of companies like Procter & Gamble are famous for cannibalizing some of their own sales, but to grow their brand overall. There's many examples of this within our own business. We have a few different niches that we focus on in the hedge fund industry. It's the hedge fund group in the private equity industry, the private equity investment group in privateequity.com, and in the family office industry, it's a family offices group. But there's some crossover, and by having all three, there's a little bit of cannibalization, but we're cutting it up into niches that make more sense, because there's a different type of person that's going to buy low-fat granola with raisins than is going to buy Smart Start or Frosted Mini Wheats that are gluten-free. Those are different niches, and you capture more of the market share by specializing. And if you come to a crowded market, let's say that you wanted to get into the cereal business, because that's what happens if you want to raise capital for real estate. You're getting into the cereal business, and there are 5,000 options out there in the marketplace. And what do you think the best strategy is? To go in there and say, we're going to create something called cereal, and it's literally going to be called cereal. It's going to be a brown box, and it's just going to list some health benefits. Nobody is ever going to buy that. It needs to have a very targeted prospect that you're going after and speak to their needs and what they want, and probably nowadays have a social media or some other strategy to get some gravity to the brand being popular. So come to the marketplace knowing that you are in the cereal business. The investment industry is relatively well developed. The exciting thing is that when you narrow it down to, I'm not just a real estate fund, I'm not just a private equity fund, I'm not just a hedge fund, but I'm going to target a very specific investor type and provide lots of value to them first instead of just going out and cold calling and pitching people all the time. That is where you can move past people. And our industry in finance is not that sophisticated when it comes to marketing. We're a bunch of people who are good at risk management, we're good at investment management, we're good at going to fancy schools. But when it comes to marketing and when it comes to sophisticated capital raising, the largest multi-billion dollar, $50 billion, $100 billion institutions have been coming to us as a small business that's just been around for 7 years since I started it for marketing insights and advice, because with all their resources, they're very, very good at some things, but not naturally good at sometimes reaching some of these investor segments. So don't be discouraged if this is not natural to you. It's not to almost anybody in finance, but it's important to understand and grasp. So a little bit more advice and examples to make this very practical. Selecting your sandbox. One more quick example. If you are raising capital for a venture capital fund, for example, let's say that you are an investor and you're looking for a solution. You're going to look for something very specific to what your fund needs, risk-wise, income-wise, minimum investment size-wise. And the best comparison to this that I have is that if you have a really bad headache and you go into a convenience store or a pharmacy to get medicine, you're not going to reach for something that says medicine. You probably won't even reach to something that says pain reliever. You're going to reach to the thing that says Excedrin migraine medicine or extra strength headache medicine. You're not going to get something generic because you have a very specific problem. That's what investors and CIOs have, is very specific wants and needs. So you need to target them specifically, or you're just going to look like medicine. You're just going to look like a real estate fund. So a couple other examples here. One family office I know, which has done well at marketing themselves in gaining new clients. They only serve German families who live in New York. So they're a New York-based family office serving German families. Another one I know serves French families, but they're based in London. Another one I know is serving energy families. Another one I know is serving families who only want to do direct investing or only want help with their direct investing and not with doing private equity, hedge funds, long only. They have that stuff figured out. Example I mentioned before is our approach to targeting billionaires with our billionaire family office offering. And then some other examples are some groups which have like a wine fund, and I've known some groups have actually been somewhat successful in raising capital for an art fund or a wine fund, and there's just not many options out there for people. So I think that there's just more examples. I just want to make this as practical as possible because this is so important to really get. go to the next slide while we answer a question from Jody. Jody says, can you offer some advice on targeting family offices in Portland, Seattle, Denver, etc.? Yeah, Jody, so I think that definitely out west is challenging. I can speak from a firsthand perspective. I would say out of Portland, Seattle, Denver, that Denver has the most prospects, and Seattle's a very close second, and Portland is probably a distant third. I found that a lot of them are under the radar mid-sized families, so a lot of $10, $30 million, a few $50, $100 million families, not too many billion-dollar families, but enough that you can raise capital, especially if you also target wealth management firms. It's definitely still worth going after. If you can expand your search to a few cities in Canada that are nearby and expand your search to Arizona, maybe Texas, Chicago, California at least California, then it'll open up a lot of doors. San Diego alone has more wealth, in my experience, than Portland, Seattle, Denver combined, or LA, San Diego for sure has more wealth than Seattle, Portland, Denver combined, probably by a factor of 2 or 3. So I would just pick your cities carefully and get well known in 3 to 5 cities or 6 cities at most, and just go back there often, provide a lot of value, and identify the best prospects possible. I use LinkedIn a lot, obviously, in our marketing. I use it to get meetings with family offices, to identify family offices, to have people reach out to me. I'm flying to Prague tomorrow, and I'm going to put something out saying, if you're a family office in Prague, I'd love to meet with you. I'm going to have my team reach out to people running family offices in Prague so I can meet with them face-to-face. I'm going to record videos while I'm in Prague on family offices and post that, so family offices there will relate to me and find me and reach out to me more easily. And I do that in pretty much every city I go to. And when I'm doing like a capital raising road show consistently to 4 or 5 cities, just a real quick tip, the best thing I've learned is not to just call, not to have your assistant call, but to basically have a process, and we'll talk about this in a different webinar, but basically you first send an email to them saying you'd love to meet, you're going to be in their town on the 17th of November, and you'd like to meet at 10 a.m. or 2 p.m., which one of those times will work best for them. And kind of assume the meeting, but don't be overly direct or pushy, or just ask if they're available at either time if that feels more appropriate for the relationship status. Then you probably won't get a response, but then you send something in direct mail, a full color letter in a red, blue, yellow envelope, something that'll get opened, and basically send them a one-page cover letter saying the exact same thing. Love to meet with you on the 17th at 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. Then you call up the day or the day after that letter gets there through express mail to confirm the meeting. And most of the times they've either got the direct mail or the email, and they'll respond to you. If they don't over the phone, you shoot them a one-line email just saying you wanted to confirm the meeting because you are coming to town and meeting with some other people that are just like them, and that usually will close the meeting. So I hope that strategy helps in terms of securing the meetings. That's pretty critical when you're targeting a small niche sandbox. I mean, you actually have to get those people to meet with you, because you might only have 50 or 100 prospects you're going after within your geographical region. All right, so now we're going to talk about my $100,000 mistakes. We're then going to answer more questions, so please start typing in your questions, and I'll get to those shortly. But these $100,000 mistakes are things that literally have cost me far more than $100,000, so it's very easy to say 100,000, and things that you can avoid, and that if I could go back in time, I could have done what I've done today in 7 years. I could have done it in 4 years if I had avoided these 2 mistakes. And these are 2 mistakes directly related to what we just presented on. So the first one is not thinking long-term enough. Investors think long-term. They look at teams. They look at how consistent they are. They look at how they basically are managing their teams. They look at how they invest their money. And they're going to base their judgment on you based on how serious you are. Have you already invested in your own fund, in your own business enough to make it a serious, ongoing business? Or do you have a one-person team with no office space, no infrastructure, no great board of advisors, etc.? So my mistake here was being too short-term minded. I came to the marketplace with a background marketing certain types of funds, and I thought those were the types that I needed to market to my investor segment, instead of kind of listening first and thinking like, okay, long term, if they're asking for these other investment solutions, I should do whatever hard work it takes to find the best world-class investments in that niche to bring to this investor class. So that slowed me down and lost me probably about a year and a half of my life. So that was a frustrating learning experience. It cost me well over $100,000. I think I spent $65,000 in hard travel costs that was mostly wasted by having the wrong types of products in front of my clients. So when I say $100,000 wasted, I don't mean like, oh, my time is worth $1,000 an hour and I wasted 100 hours. I mean literally I've spent over $100,000 wasting time or wasting resources, not just time. The other thing is not having a long-term mindset is how you put out the advice that you give. When I started out, we had low quality website, but we turned out so much advice and there's so little competition. We got a ton of notoriety. I've given over 50 speeches in 20 countries now, and we just got invited to speak everywhere and got book deals, and our training programs grew in popularity because there weren't too many other people doing it. But if I had a little bit more long-term of a mindset, I would have improved our brand faster. I would have gotten institutional partners and billion-dollar families coming to me faster. And once we did make everything institutional quality looking and feeling and that type of quality level, immediately the quality of people approaching us started going up. And that's when the big prospects and bigger opportunities came towards me. So I would say that because of that improvement in quality and in being more long-term minded, for example, one publicly traded investment bank, put us on a $180,000 contract to advise them on their marketing strategy and their, basically their accomplishment of what I just explained to you, this whole sandbox strategy for that investment bank. We helped them execute and get their first 90 clients in the door. The second $100,000 mistake is the 2 million person sandbox. I'm an idea person. It's my strength and my weakness. I think everybody's strength is typically their weakness as well. So my team helps rein me in and make sure that we don't get too excited by the next sandbox or the open territory. And I think that, my mistake here was just not being refined enough early enough. We started out and we gained a lot of popularity in the family office segment in general, but then it took an iteration to figure out, well, single family for me are more valuable than the multifamily offices, and another iteration to target those billion-dollar families. If I could have sped up that process, it would have helped speed up our success. And so I think the lesson here is to think very long-term about how you're approaching the thought leadership in your investor sandbox. Don't do this for 6 months. This has to be a 3-5 year adventure. This has to be a 5-7 year kind of test case that you're doing. And you have to have the attitude that for example, with Billionaire Family Office is a perfect example of I don't care how long it takes to become the best known person for serving billion-dollar families, whether that takes me 6 months, 6 years, or 16 years. If I can become the standout #1 advisor to billionaire families, that's an excellent position to be in, and I won't look back. That'll be a great leg to our business or our whole central part of our business, and nothing else will matter compared to that. So you have to choose a sandbox that is so exciting that if you're able to accomplish it, that you'll do very, very well. One of my friends has done this in the pension fund CIO area. He does pension fund CIO investment consulting work. He now manages over $200 billion, and he's in his lower 30s. He's 32 years old, or 33, I think. He was just named one of the top 10 investors in all of London, institutional investors in all of London. He's in his early 30s, and it's by doing this type of strategy of identifying your sandbox, doing thought leadership, adding value first, he was able to accomplish that. So another great example right from our industry. Okay, now we'll move on to just a real quick note on our capital raising workshop before answering questions. Basically, we hold full-day intensive capital raising workshops where we walk you through some of what we just covered. Binder, you do training modules, basically worksheets, and we have you go through a binder, complete worksheets, and you network with 100 other peers in the industry. So there's only capital raisers in the room. It's all about 8 hours of in-depth, what are the habits you need, the rituals you need, how to use marketing automation and capital raising automation to know when somebody's opened an email, to know what document somebody's downloaded, to only call people who have opened your emails and clicked on a link, to know and be notified when somebody downloads your PowerPoint from your email that you get an email sent to you and you should call that person 10 minutes later because they just opened your PowerPoint and they're actually going to know who you are for the next 10 minutes if you call them. We talk about a capital raising funnel and how you build that from a blog post to articles to white papers to books to audio interviews to live seminars to dominate a tiny little niche. We also talk about creating your investor avatar in great detail so you know everything about what your investor wants and needs and their frustrations. And we talk about what assets and skills you need to become the authority of your niche. And we go over a lot of capital raising cold calling, capital raising marketing, sales, and conference call, due diligence questionnaire templates. And we go over a whole series of my top 8 $100,000 mistakes. I just talked about 2 of them, but there's many others as well that I've made. And I kind of just share those transparently just in my attempt to provide a lot of value to everyone who attends. So if you'd like to come to one of these capital raising workshops, we have them going on all the time. Our next one is in Manhattan coming up in just about a month. And it's at the Harvard Club. We always have these at places like the Raffles Hotel, the Harvard Club, the New York Athletic Club, the Oxford Club, places like that. And it's a very high-end, fully catered, excellent event. One thing I'll mention about this event before we go into questions is that it's 100% guaranteed. If you pay for this event and you come and you don't like the food, you don't like the people in the room, you think that what I said is boring, that you already know all this stuff, you just let us know. You get 100% of your money back, no problem at all. Because you know what? We've had literally thousands of people at our events. I think we've had maybe 2 people out of those thousands ever refund. Nobody ever does, because when we go there, we just way over deliver. You're going to get $10,000 worth of value if you come to this capital raising workshop. And I think you're going to love it. And I think you can see from the time you've spent here that I'm giving real advice. This isn't Mickey Mouse 101 type stuff. Hopefully it's stuff you've never heard anywhere else and people that you haven't heard other places. We're now going to answer questions from people. I'll leave up this summary key point slide, but here's one question about, you mentioned that you first begin to gain traction with wealth management firms. How do you go about targeting and approaching wealth management firms? So we first started targeting them by going after RIAs, which are registered investment advisors, wealth management firms, broker-dealers, and broker-dealer networks. So it would identify a broker-dealer network, which would basically be a wealth management firm that has independent advisors on it. They might have 50 advisors, they might have 400. In many cases, there was 200 advisors on a broker-dealer network, independent advisors. Out of those 200, about 50 would have high net worth clients. And the situation back then, 2006, was a lot of them had their money in variable annuities, and the central firm could make more money and have a healthier business and just have a more balanced business if they would move some of their money out of variable annuities and into separate managed accounts, hedge funds, private equity, etc. So we were able to go from not making any progress or raising any capital in that niche to raising a lot of capital by providing thought leadership to that central wealth management firm that has the 200 advisors, telling them about what we do, how we can help the advisors position the separate managed account and hedge funds that we are raising capital for against variable annuities, mutual funds, and ETFs to diversify their portfolios. They liked that, and they wanted their advisors to be doing that, so they would give us the contact details for the advisors that were on their platform. That took some work and some face-to-face trust building, relationship building, and sometimes we'd be kind of discreet that they had given us those contact details. But that's how we did it at the beginning. We got onto platforms, onto separate managed account platforms, onto hedge fund platforms. We raised capital through those types of private banking platforms. We raised a lot of capital that way. And then we raised capital by calling on wealth management firms and family offices directly and selling directly as well. So those were the real 3 ways. Broker-dealer networks, advisor networks, is one way, the investment or private banking platforms the second way, and then calling directly to family offices and wealth management firms. And that's how we kind of turned the corner. There's another question. When choosing a sandbox, is the size of AUM very important in whom we choose to put in that sandbox to start with? Yes, it is very important. My first job in capital raising, nobody wanted to hire me because they all said you need 5-7 years of experience or we don't want you on our team. So I said, okay, I'll work for you for free until you think I'm worth it. and I just cold called every institutional investment consultant, and I set up dozens of phone calls for our fund managers. But all the phone calls went nowhere because they wanted funds with $100 million or more in assets under management. And the client I had at that point, we did bring on one $700 million client and then a $20 billion fund manager. But at that point, when I was calling those consultants, it was a $30 million fund, and nobody wanted to work with us. And so we had to change strategies. Our sandbox was pretty loosely defined and not targeted very well in terms of thought leadership. We were just cold calling them and sending them emails. But we were able to get responses, but it wasn't productive at all to raising capital because they don't allocate to funds that are less than $100 million typically. And so we changed our strategy and started focusing on those wealth management firms and advisor networks. I think it definitely matters what your AUM is. And I would say that you can focus on geography, and that's not a bad sandbox. Like if you're a family office in Monaco, you could become the best known family office in Monaco, and that's a sandbox. You have competitors, but are they looking to become the best well-known? Most of them are not good at marketing. Most of them say, oh, we like to keep a quote-unquote low profile, and that just means they don't spend a lot of time on their marketing, basically, and that's an opportunity. If you're the number one best-known family office in Singapore, that's going to bring you business. So geography is not a bad sandbox. If you're a fund manager, sometimes it only means so much, but if you're the number one private equity fund focusing on South Africa, that's something. If you're the number one hedge fund investing in frontier countries, that's something. And some people are going to look to allocate to geographies, and that's where you can define a sandbox around geography as a fund manager or a real estate manager. So I hope that helps answer your question, but it definitely matters what your AUM is. Okay, how do you raise money for a good investment strategy that is a startup, so no or very little AUM? Yeah, so everybody faces this at some point. So I think the shortest answer is you have to be creative. You have to not be stuck in a mindset of, I'm going to go in the door of this high net worth investor or family office, and I want them to invest, and I'm going to discount their fees, or I'm going to, give them less of a lockup period or something of that nature. You have to be somewhat flexible, and if they ask for equity for putting an investment up front, you might have to do that. If you want to really raise capital fastest, you need to build an excellent team. One of the things I do is serve on the advisory board or as a director executive to fund managers, and it's basically one part of our business is basically taking 5% equity stakes in some fund managers and being their long-term kind of outsourced chief marketing officer. And in return, we're going to look over their marketing materials, give them advice, help them target a sandbox, help them implement all this capital raising advice. And we don't do phone calls and emails for them, but I guarantee we'll increase the chances that they're going to get capital allocated to them. And we've seen our ability to do that in the past in this advisory type position. So you might need to give up equity to board members. You might need to give up equity to a capital raiser, or bring on somebody who will make 50 phone calls and emails a day and say, if you help me raise $50 million in the first 3 years or 5 years, then you just earned yourself 20% equity. If you get to $100 million, you just earn yourself 33% equity, et cetera. So you have to be very creative in how you build your team, how you build your board, how you approach investors, how you look at seed capital, maybe considering risk capital. And then in terms of choosing the sandbox, you have to think who is most up the learning curve, and that will mitigate the risk of them investing in a new fund. Like the VC micro fund from India, target people who are from India who work in the tech industry and they're ultra wealthy. If you're going to invest in sports franchises and buy professional sporting teams, well, go after professional athletes. They'll love to brag about how, like Jay-Z owning part of the Nets, I think it is. I think it's like 0.5% or 1%, but he markets the hell out of that position. And he's known for being a partial owner, and he's always sitting courtside and doing marketing arrangements with them, and has friends with all the NBA players, and I believe has his own, professional athletes agency, if I'm not mistaken. So Jay-Z is a genius at pulling off some of these strategies in that way, and I think that you have to be very creative like that when you're getting started. So I hope that helps answer your question. There's one other question up above here that I think I missed. Let me scroll back up here and grab that. Anyway, let's see here. What are some natural demographics to go after out west? I know you mentioned Silicon Valley. Our fund is in the LA area. Another question about invited to speak because of my blog, but they all want a $3,000 speaking fee. Okay, so I'll answer both questions. So first is about LA targeting, and you could apply this to probably pretty much anywhere, but I'll talk about demographics, and the second is about $3,000 speaking fees. So here are the two answers here, and then we'll have time for one more question after that if you have one. So for LA demographics, Los Angeles is a really diversified business city, so you get all types of business owners there, a lot of foreign money in San Francisco and LA. A lot of foreigners who come to the U.S. go to four cities. They go to San Francisco, LA, they go to New York, and they go to Miami. I would say they take the lion's share of the big wealth that moves into the U.S. So you could target foreign families coming into LA, maybe of the same descendant that you naturally are, or something you can relate to or have business connections to. Obviously, there's the movie business and a lot of professional, athletes in California. Obviously, there's a lot of doctors, surgeons, medical high net worth, and we talked about before how San Diego and LA have some of the wealthiest, zip codes and counties in the region. I know one person who in Denver joined a Porsche club, and he owned a Porsche and just basically joined it to get all the clients. And, he naturally had a passion for it, so he used a three-circle strategy of helping be a leader within that Porsche club and got to meet all these high-net-worth people who became his clients. So I guarantee you could find a Ferrari club of Los Angeles, and that could be one of your three ways to network. That could be one of your three sandbox niches. Or join a Ferrari club in 3 different cities and drive your Ferrari between the cities and be the ringleader of that whole region. That's just one strategy that may or may not be too conservative or extreme or unrealistic for where you're at, but you have to do something that is different. If you do it something like everybody else, then you're just going to blend in, be gray and average, and in my opinion, go out of business. So, some people think that we're, pretty aggressive on constantly sending out white papers, audio interviews, always being in touch, having events, doing webinars like this, but that's how we're different, in a meaningful way. So another question we had was about speaking fees. So the trick here, and I with professional athletes, they play professional football for 3 years, and for the rest of their life they can get paid $10,000 to speak. And, the rest of us, work very hard for 20 years, and then people want us to pay to speak. So my trick was this. I targeted a niche that I knew was in demand, and that conference organizers probably have a hard time finding experts in that area. You then need to define yourself in a way where you're going to be allowed to speak for free, or they're going to pay you to speak. So if you are a fund manager and you put yourself out there as I'm a fund manager, and I'm also an expert on gold, and it's a gold fund we offer, they're going to charge you to speak because fund managers pay to speak. If you start a gold commodities association, or if you start some sort of gold investors representative group or something of that nature, or a gold newsletter, and you get a great following, and you have 500 people a week or 500 people a month getting your gold newsletter, or you have 200 people in your gold commodity association, a lot of them are investors, and you also run a fund, and that's just one of the 5 things you do is you have this fund, because that's natural, you're an expert in gold, so you have a gold investment fund because people ask you for help, then that is much different, and that is positioning. That is using the sandbox strategy in a way so that you are perceived different as a person who adds value and doesn't just extract value. You're not just taking gold out of the ground, you're adding value to other people, basically. And so if you're seen in the light of being a best-selling author, being the biggest newsletter provider in a niche, being connected to lots of investors, being connected to being the number one thought leader in terms of you being prolific and having written more articles on gold or fixed income in Australia or VC micro funds than anybody else in the world, then people are going to hunt you down and want you to speak at their events. And here's the thing. I get invited to at least one event every single week. I would say every year I'm probably invited to speak at somewhere between 70 and 100 events. Out of all of those events, I don't want to go to most of them because either they're quasi-competition, they're at a bad time for me, I've got a young daughter at home. I don't want to live on United Airlines, even though sometimes it feels like I still do. And some of them are in places like, literally, there's one I was looking at yesterday in Kazakhstan, and there's some in Tokyo when I'm going to be in like LA the day before. It's just not practical. So I deny most of them because of convenience and competitiveness. But a lot of them comes down to like, well, what's the annoyance factor on that? If I'm already in Toronto, okay, maybe I'll speak at that Toronto event and I'll do it for free. But if it's going to be an annoyance, then I just tell them that I have the #1 association on family offices, the #1 best-selling book, the most popular website in the industry. I've met with 1,000 in person, and we work with a lot of billionaire family offices. And there are some things we do that are selling. Like sometimes we help raise capital for funds. Sometimes we're on the board or equity holders in a fund, or we're helping with direct investing, co-investing projects. But the positioning we have and a lot of the value we add is in our thought leadership and our association. So what I tell them is that my speaking fee is $2,000, or that's going to be annoying for me to go to. So I won't say the word annoying in the email, but I'll say my speaking fee is $4,000 for that event. And I was just paid just in the last month $4,000 for a 45-minute speech at an event. And so if I can accomplish that coming from Portland, Oregon, going to Oregon State University, and then building this up and being able to charge people $4,000 instead of paying $3,000 to speak, then I think you can as well. And I think it's just a matter of using the strategies I've already mentioned here. And luckily, your question coincides right in line with how you can also speak for free all over the world and eventually have people pay for you to speak, or at least pay your expenses. I've gone to Moscow and Brussels and Singapore and Tokyo and Toronto and New York and LA and Las Vegas and Phoenix and Monaco and Zurich and many other countries for free, and they pay all my expenses just to give a 45-minute speech because I've built up our thought leadership enough in our niche. So there's a lot of fun side benefits that come to this as well, and it builds a lot of credibility that we're producing videos in 20 different countries around the world, because it's just one more flag in the ground, tangible proof that, hey, if this guy is sharing real, genuine family office advice, and he's literally standing in front of an old church in Zurich, or he's standing in front of the Flyer in Singapore, or he's standing in Red Square in Moscow, maybe he knows something, or maybe he's not going to be a complete waste of my time to watch this 2-minute YouTube video. So it can help get people's attention and add credibility to do the speaking circuit, and you make great connections as well. So I hope that's not too long-winded of an answer, but hopefully it was helpful. We have one last question here. Let's see here. Oh, no, I guess that was a question I already answered. So does anybody else have another question? We literally have about 4.5 minutes left. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to type in your last question here, and I'm happy to answer that in our next couple minutes available. Okay, we have one question here. Feel free to keep typing if you're in the middle of typing one in. I can answer two real quick. This question is, what video capture tool do you use when you travel to make these videos? Well, if you look at our YouTube channels and you look at our videos, you'll see some are less than Spielberg quality in terms of the production value. But I would encourage you just to get the video out and focus on the value of the advice, and then you can slowly improve production quality. I've used everything from a flip camera to a little Coolpix. I've used a super high definition one that was a huge pain to edit, and I would never recommend that. Most of the time, your videos are going to be shown on the web, and just 720 or 1080 is more than enough basic. You don't need to have a $1,000 camera. Lately, I've actually been starting to use my iPhone to record videos when I'm traveling. It's very convenient. I did one in Singapore recently that was a bit too shaky. I don't know if I had too much coffee that morning or what, but it looked like there was an earthquake during the video, and I didn't like how that turned out. So I try to always use a tripod. You can just get a $50 5-foot tall tripod from Best Buy or off Amazon, and I bring that with me when I travel. And I'd look for a shot that overlooks the city of Monaco, or some historical building like the Reichstag in Berlin is where I recorded a bunch of videos earlier this year. And it leaves an impression on people. It really works. And I was inspired by someone when I was growing up. I watched all of his videos on YouTube, and he was a risk management investment professional. And he was always on the porch of like an apartment building saying, hey, I'm here in Frankfurt. I'm coaching this bank on this or that. And it was always just 5 or 10 minutes of insight, but I just really appreciated it, and it was just so engaging because it was international. And just thought, like, man, that guy is really successful. and it's just kind of stuck with me to try to implement that in what we do. So hope that helps. But I just basically use an iPhone, and then it's a really cheap, $30 video editing software I grabbed off of Google. It's nothing special, and honestly, it's a little bit not very user-friendly, so I don't even want to recommend that video editing tool. All right, so I think we've got 2 minutes, but I don't see any other questions here, so we'll just wrap it up. If you have a burning question that you're just dying to get answered, I'm going to be traveling globally, in the next 24 hours, so I can't promise I'm going to get back to you in a day. But if you were on this webinar and you paid to be here, or you're a platinum member or a premium member with us, send in your question and mention that you were on the webinar and you just have an important question, and then I'll make sure and get back to you within the next 3 to 4 business days and just do my best to hold true to that promise. Typically, when you call into our office or email us, you'll get Ashley or Doug or Theo or someone else very helpful on my team, because we're trying to keep up with all the thought leadership and speaking and traveling and such. But I'm happy to answer a private question if you didn't want to answer it or ask it publicly here in the webinar. So thanks again for your time. If you want to keep in touch with us, please come to our capital raising workshop. It's going to be amazing. I know you're going to love it. We always get excellent feedback on it, and it's just really in-depth, capital raising advice. And I'm a fast-talking trainer. I don't wade through ideas and bore people to death. Every 15, 20 minutes, you're doing an exercise. We're standing up, you're networking, you're meeting new people, you're implementing, and by the time you leave, you've got a capital raising plan for exactly what you need to do. So if you're interested in coming to that, I'd love to see you there. We can also give you a discount if you paid for this webinar, a discount for coming to our next capital raising workshop. And if you want to come, please send us an email at team@familyoffices.com. You can also register directly right now if you'd like to at capitalraising.com/workshops. And if you'd like to keep in touch, our contact details are here. Our websites are familyofficesgroup.com, hedgefundgroup.org, privateequity.com, and then our family office focused area is the Billionaire Family Office, and that's billionairefamilyoffice.com. If you have one last burning questions, you can shoot that to me at richard@familyofficesgroup.com. If it's something my team can very easily answer, I'll forward it on to them, but otherwise I'm happy to answer directly. And just so you guys know, we have offices in Portland, Oregon, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. I spend a lot of time in New York, Singapore, and London, and I have over a million frequent flyer miles now on United Airlines, so sometimes I feel like I live on United Airlines, so you might see me sitting next to you on a flight one day. So thanks for joining us for this webinar. I hope you found a lot of value from it, and hopefully you're able to join us for another capital raising training module in the future. Please reach out to our team if you have questions about our past webinars. We've done half a dozen of them now. We do 1 or 2 every month, and our goal is to provide well over $1,000 of value in each webinar that we provide. So take care. It's Richard Wilson, and please keep in touch. Bye.